1965 to resolve the controversy, leading to their meeting at Geneva in February 1966, which resulted in the agreement that Mr. Reichler will address in detail. The territory of present-day Guyana comprises the Dutch settlements of Berbice, Demerara, and Essequibo, established in the early 17th century. These settlements were recognized by Spain in the 1648 Treaty of Munster, forming part of the Peace of Westphalia that ended the 30 Years' War. In 1814, the Netherlands ceded these territories to Britain. In 1831, they were consolidated into the colony of British Guyana. Upon Venezuela's independence in 1810, the boundary had not yet been determined. By 1840, however, with the discovery of gold in the upper Cuyuni River, Venezuela had proposed the conclusion of a treaty claiming the Essequibo River as its boundary with British Guyana. For its part, Britain's claim extended to the prized mouth of the Orinoco River. By 1895, the boundary dispute had escalated into a diplomatic crisis between Britain and the United States. The Monroe Doctrine strongly opposed British expansion in the Americas. By 1897, under threat of war with the United States, Britain agreed to arbitration to resolve the boundary dispute. It was, in the words of one historian, one of the most momentous episodes in the history of Anglo-American relations in general, and of Anglo-American rivalries in Latin America in particular. This was a notable instance of peaceful dispute settlement in a historical period when recourse to war was a continuation of politics by other means. The Washington Treaty between Great Britain and the United States of Venezuela was concluded on 2 February 1897. The preamble set out its object and purpose as an amicable settlement of the boundary between the colony of British Guyana and the United States of Venezuela. Article 1 provided for the creation of an arbitral tribunal, and Article 3 defined its jurisdiction to determine the boundary line between the colony of British Guyana and the United States of Venezuela. Article 8 further stipulated that the high contracting parties engage to consider the result of the proceeds of the Tribunal of Arbitration as a full, perfect, and final settlement of all the questions referred to the arbitrators. Pursuant to Article 2, the tribunal comprised 5 eminent jurists, namely 2 British judges, the Lord Chief Justice of England and a Lord Justice of Appeal of the English High Court, 2 American judges, the Chief Justice and another Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, and, as president, chosen by the 4 arbitrators, the renowned Russian jurist Fyodor de Martins. Among his contributions to international law, in 1899 alone, Professor de Martins chaired the Hague Peace Conference, which established the Permanent Court of Arbitration, introduced the so-called Martins Clause into the 1899 Hague Convention on the Laws and Customs of War, and delivered the arbitral award that resolved the boundary dispute between British Guyana and Venezuela. The tribunal over which Professor de Martins presided held 54 meetings. The parties presented a massive volume of documents on effectivité, covering 300 years of Spanish, Dutch, and British rule in the disputed territories. On 3 October 1899, after extensive deliberations, the tribunal established the boundary in a unanimous award. The result was widely hailed as a victory for Venezuela. The Venezuelan minister in London described it to his Minister of Foreign Affairs in these words: "Greatly indeed did justice shine forth when in the determination of the frontier we were given the exclusive dominion over the Orinoco, which was the principal aim which we sought to achieve through arbitration." The following year, in 1900, Britain and Venezuela established a joint commission to undertake the physical demarcation of the boundary. By 1905, after years of arduous work, the boundary was demarcated with pillars and geographic features stretching 825 kilometers from the Caribbean coast to the tri-junction point with Brazil in the Amazon basin. The Commission produced an official boundary map with the clear specification of the boundary line with the Arbitral Award of Paris, according with the Arbitral Award of Paris. This map appears at tab 2 of the judge's folder. The 1905 map was exceptionally accurate. It followed 15,440 points from the monument at Punta Playa in the north to the top of Mount Roraima in the south. Those points are confirmed by modern satellite imagery. In the years that followed, the 1899 award was fully respected by both parties. In 1932, a tripartite agreement confirmed the point of convergence of the boundaries of Venezuela, Brazil, and British Guyana, concluded by exchanges of notes among the three neighboring states. In 1944, Venezuela reconfirmed that the boundary was a chose jugée and that it had accepted the verdict of the arbitration for which we have so persistently asked. The boundary stood uncontested for more than 60 years. Then, in 1962, during the decolonization period, while Guyana was moving toward its independence, Venezuela suddenly repudiated the 1899 award. On 14 December 1960, the UN had adopted Resolution 1514, the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples. A year later, on 18 December 1961, Premier of British Guyana, Dr. Chedi Jagan, petitioned the Special Political and Decolonization Committee of the General Assembly, the Fourth Committee, to bring about the immediate political independence of his country. On 15 January 1962, the United Kingdom informed the committee that it was willing to hold a constitutional conference on the independence of British Guyana. On the same day, Venezuela conveyed to the United States its intention to demand a revision of the 1899 award so that Venezuela might realize the recovery of its territory. This new policy, Venezuela noted, was based on the fact that British Guyana's independence had been introduced unexpectedly and had been immediately supported by the communist countries. Contemporaneous diplomatic dispatches confirm that Venezuelan President Betancourt was concerned about British Guyana becoming a Cuba on the South American continent. He had a plan to create a cordon sanitaire by persuading the United Kingdom to cede a major slice of British Guyana to Venezuela prior to independence. It was Venezuela's view that the possibility of achieving a revision of the boundary is better while British Guyana is still a colony. On 14 February 1962, Venezuela wrote to the UN Fourth Committee. Contrary to its unequivocal conduct during the previous 6 decades, it referred to a long-standing dispute on demarcation of the frontier. It claimed for the first time that it could not recognize the 1899 award because it was allegedly an Anglo-Russian political transaction carried out behind Venezuela's back by the Russian president of the tribunal acting in collusion with the 2 British arbitrators. The only evidence invoked by Venezuela was a document published posthumously, allegedly written in 1944 by Mr. Severo Mallet-Prévost, an American lawyer who had served as junior counsel to Venezuela 45 years earlier in 1899. It was published upon his death in the July 1949 issue of the American Journal of International Law, 13 years before it was invoked by Venezuela in 1962. The memorandum did not identify, let alone produce, any evidence in support of the Anglo-Russian conspiracy theory. Thus, on 22 February 1962, Venezuela sought to reopen its territorial claim in 1899 before the UN Fourth Committee based on the Mallet-Prévost memorandum. Venezuela claimed for the first time that it cannot recognize the validity of the award. It called for negotiations to rectify what it portrayed as an injustice. The United Kingdom categorically rejected Venezuela's contention of nullity. A note from the Foreign Office dated 21 February 1962 made clear that there is no case to answer because the matter was settled for all time over 60 years ago by international arbitration. Another note dated 15 May 1962 reported that the Venezuelan Foreign Minister, Dr. Ignacio Iribarren Borges, had expressed his government's determination to press its territorial claim either before the United Nations committees or the International Court of Justice. On 13 November 1962, following a statement by Dr. Iribarren before the Fourth Committee, pressing Venezuela's contention of nullity, the United Kingdom representative Mr. Colin Crowe made a proposal for resolution of the controversy. He stated that while the British government does not accept that there is any frontier dispute to discuss, it hoped that this problem can be finally disposed of now so that British Guyana can move forward to independence without any shadow of doubt about its frontiers. In this context, the United Kingdom offered to discuss with the Venezuelan government, through diplomatic channels, arrangements for a tripartite Venezuela, British Guyana, United Kingdom examination of the voluminous documentary material relevant to this question. Such a process, Mr. Crowe emphasized, would establish that there is no justification whatsoever for reopening the frontier question. He made it very clear that this was not an offer to engage in substantive talks about revision of the frontier, Because it had been finally settled